Hey folks, Alan Manic the Hot Rod Hippie here. In a previous video, I showed you how to bead roll without distortion. In that video, I already had a rounded over lip on the edge of the piece I was creating for this inner fender on my dad's 1965 GMC pickup truck. So how is it I created that rounded over edge? Folks have asked, so let's go ahead and check it out. This week's video is brought to you by Audible. Personally, about a year ago, I switched away from listening to the same songs day in and day out to listening to audiobooks. I've been chewing through books ever since. You can get yourself a free, no-risk 30-day trial of Audible. Follow the link audibletrial.com/HRH. Check it out for yourself, cancel at any time, see what I'm going on about with audiobooks today. So my dad's 65 GMC is on airbags. It lays frame, it really tucks the tires up into the fenders, so I had to create bubbled up inner fenders on that truck. With that, I created a nice bead detail on the side of it, I did a whole video about, as I've already mentioned, and then I had a rounded lip on there to give it a really nice finished look. Folks asked, how did I create that rounded over lip? Well, that's a good question. I used my bead roller. That's the primary tool I used to create that lip, but there's more to it than just that, so let's get into it. So to create that rounded radius edge on that inner fender, I use these dies here. These are the 2 roll dies from Mittler Brothers. I've had these dies for a while now. They're a 3/4 inch radius die. They're really handy for creating that nice, clean design. They form that edge to create that rounded over look. Now that's an important thing I just said. They form. They do not shape metal, they form metal. So there is preparation we need to do here. If we just go ahead and form a piece of flat metal, let's take a look at what happens. Quick important note here, you do need to have the adjustable upper shaft on your bead roller to use these dies. They don't work through the traditional concept of tightening up and down the dies closer and farther apart from each other. They work by using the collar to push the upper die closer to the lower die and actually form the metal around it in stages. So that is an important thing to note. You need to have that adjustable shaft to use these dies. So let's start with this blank here. I've cut it into the shape of the inner wheelhouse. So let's go ahead and roll it through here, form the edge of it, and see what happens without any preparation work, just sticking the flat metal through here. We go through here stage after stage, slowly bringing the upper die out and rounding the metal over the lower die. While using these dies, what I do is I usually line up that edge, that lip, on the upper die, the very end of the radius, with the edge of my panel. It is difficult, I will not claim it is not, but I just follow lightly along that edge. I'm gonna trim back the edge of the panel right there at that radius anyway for the finished product, so the marring that that little lip gives to it, I'm not worried about that in the end. I use that and I slowly walk it through on the first few passes, slowly bringing the upper die outward toward the lower die to form around it. Okay, let's speed through this and I'll show you the finished product. The finished product, it's got the nice rounded over radius, exactly what we were looking for on this piece, but it's a potato chip. The thing has a big reverse curve. It's terrible how concave it is. It is completely useless. I have no use for this piece at this point. So now what happened here? As I said, we formed this piece, we didn't shape this piece. You can check out my 8 metal shaping terms defined video. I keep harping on that video, but really you need to understand those terms to understand what's going on here. In there, I'll talk about shrinking. I talk about forming versus shaping. And that's what needs to happen here. We need to shrink the edge of this piece. What we need to think about here is we've got this radius here. This radius is part of a bigger picture. It is part of a complete circle. Think about that complete circle. Now, if we had, say, a 24-inch across circle and we wanted to roll a radius onto it, well, as we roll that radius on there, the edge of that circle is actually getting smaller. It's coming in toward the middle a little bit. Well, to do that requires shrinking, because now we're asking the same amount of material to take up less space, to be in a smaller circle. So it needs to be shrunk along this edge. That's where the shrinker stretcher comes into this equation. I'm gonna go ahead and use a shrinker stretcher along that edge to create the smaller circumference of the circle that we want. So let's go ahead and show you how that works. We're gonna start this piece by going full depth with a light shrink. Because this is aluminum, it will shrink quick. Keeping my shrinks pretty close together. Now you can see here we've already created this arch, the opposite direction of what the previous panel, the incorrectly done panel, was. It's pretty close to how that panel was. I think I'm gonna go one more step on the very edge of this one. So I'm only going about half depth on this pass, and again, light shrinking. I don't need to move it too much. I'm only going half depth on this one because the very edge is the part that needs the most shrinking. I already feel like I might be going a little heavy on this one. So here's my shrunk panel. I've got this edge shrunk down and around a little bit. It's heading the direction I need it to head. And you can see the arch that's in this piece is the opposite direction of the incorrect piece. So that's exactly what I was looking to create with my blank. Now it's ready to go through the bead roller and be formed to create that rounded over edge. Let's check it out. So I've got this upper die backed off with the adjuster backed up toward the machine itself, so I have more space between the upper and the lower die to start feeding this, start rounding this piece over. So let's get to it. As I said, I'm starting with this edge and I kind of guided off of this lip right here and I kind of just ride on this edge. It's a challenge for sure, but it's how I like to do it. Going a little bit fast on this run, but I can handle it. Maybe, probably, most likely. Now you can see with pass number 1, I'm already starting to get that rounded over edge I'm looking for at least a little bit. We've also lost a ton of that arch already. We're heading into a much flatter territory. I can't decide quite if I want to shrink this one last little time. Now's the time to do it before I get too much shape onto this edge. I'm probably going to regret it, but I think I'm going to put just a little more shrink onto this edge. So just quickly, I did do one more bite with the shrinker on the edge of this piece. I went in only 1/4 of an inch on my third pass along this. I felt like after that beginning of forming this edge, I was just a little too flat already because I knew I had a little bit more to go. So I needed just a little more shrinking on this edge. They're very light shrink passes, the 3 different ones that I've done so far. It was 1 inch deep, 1/2 inch deep, and 1/4 inch deep. They were light passes because this is aluminum, it moves quickly. Now I've brought the upper die closer to the lower die so that I'm creating more of a rounded over shape as I go through on my second pass here. Now I'm going to do what should be close to my final pass. I usually do a couple of my final passes, so we'll see. Now that's that for how I created that round over edge. What I did for the rest of the wheel arch was I went ahead and just rolled a piece of sheet metal to match this shape this way. Flat piece, no rounding over on the edge of it. And I just laid it on top of this piece. I made it a little wider than it needed to be. I laid it on top of this and I scribed from the inside along this edge to go ahead and then cut that piece so that it mated perfectly along this flange edge, and then I welded it there. That was basically how I did that. This edge ends up just a little bit inconsistent when you're all said and done between the shrinking and the forming because you don't necessarily get it 100% perfect going through those dies. So I could see myself filing this or just lightly grinding it to try and get it a little more flat, a little more uniform along that edge before I scribe it to the inside piece. That's up to you how you want to handle that. So you can see it's not a ton of shrink required to create this shape. But I did have to create that shrink in there, otherwise I end up with this failed piece, this big potato chip. A really important note here, do test pieces. You are not gonna nail this on the first attempt. Your first try using these dies, you're gonna have to learn. You're gonna have the piece kind of fight you. It's gonna fall in and out of these dies as you're using it because the die is trying to force the piece kind of out as you're working with it. You need to guide it really gently. That is something you're going to have to learn to do. I learned to do that with these dies just by doing it over and over again, trying out some test pieces. You will get a feel for it eventually. Also, you're going to have to do test pieces to figure out how much shrink you need. In making this video, I screwed up. I shrunk way too much on the first piece that I did. Luckily, I cut a handful of blanks because I knew that was probably going to happen. So I dialed back the shrink on the actual piece that I just showed you how to make. So folks, that was how I created that inner fender, that rounded over lip edge on that piece with my Mittler Brothers bead rollers, Mittler Brother dies, and my Mittler Brothers stand for my Lancaster shrinkers to go ahead and create this shape. So I'm going to go ahead and drop links in the description down below to the products I actually used in this video so you can check them out for yourself. Go ahead and drop the video a like if you found it interesting. Let me know in the comments down below what you thought of this video, this project, the shape that I've created for you. Go ahead and check out these previous videos that I've done. We've got the how to bead roll without distortion video, and we've got the 8 metal shaping terms defined video. You really should check that out. Patreon.com/HotRodHippie, or you can click that link right there, directly support this channel. These materials do cost me money, folks. And subscribe to keep up to date with all the latest content. Thanks for coming around, folks.